Hi, y'all. Welcome into Basketball by Association. I'm Paula Dean. That's Joel C. Cordes over there. Joel, put a slab of butter in it. Let's get this thing cooking.
Make something delicious, Paula. It is episode 149 here on Basketball by Association. Not only will we talk about the NBA Finals, of course, a lot of Suns news. Chris Paul is in the news. Frank Vogel is going to be their new coach. All that good stuff. A couple other items along the way I'm sure that we'll get to. But we do need to name the episode. And Arky, Shea, sometimes things get into uncanny valley because last week, if you recall, episode 148 was the Udonis Haslem episode because Udonis Haslem was the only player who had logged 148 career playoff games.
Okay.
Do you recall what happened last night? Did you watch the game 3 of the NBA Finals?
Specific to Udonis Haslem?
Udonis Haslem got into the game during the last 3 minutes of the blowout, which means technically Udonis Haslem, trying to double dip on his way out in his final season here, moved up one slot, so he shares 149 career playoff games with this other gentleman who, this is going to be a big clue of Uncanny Valley, is also connected to this episode in some way. 149 career playoff games. Let's see if you can guess who this is. 12-time All-Star, 6-time Steal champ, on the 05-06 All-Rookie team, 9-time All-Defensive player. He's on the NBA 75th anniversary team, 5-time assist champ, 11-time All-NBA. Oh, by the way, he was the 05-06 Rookie of the Year, and he was the 2012-2013 All-Star Game MVP. I felt like we had named an episode for this guy already, but it would have been based on jersey number, and we definitely did not name it for him as far as I can tell, though this would have gone way back. So that gives you a clue that it's a low digit jersey number as well.
Did you say could you say like the last 3 accolades real quick again?
Yep. He was the 05-06 Rookie of the Year.
Okay.
11-time All-NBA player. 2012-2013 All-Star Game MVP. And for another clue, he is still currently in the league and connected to this episode.
Low number, Steel 05. Was 05, was that Chris Paul rookie year?
Yeah, it's Chris Paul. This is the Chris Paul episode, right as, he may get released from the Suns. It's that point in his career, but he's been around the block long enough to have logged 149 career playoff games and hopefully counting.
05-06. That's where did he come out of?
Wake Forest.
Yeah, Wake Forest. Yeah. He's a demon deacon.
Him and Timmy Duncan. The two biggest,
literal only 2 Wake Forest players I think I can think of,
right?
Of any consequence. So, all right, look at here. The Udonis Haslem does not get the double dip in this, although maybe if he gets to 151,
we'll think about it. We'll think about it. UD, if you can hang on long enough, we'll think about it.
All right, well, let's get straight into the Chris Paul episode. We really haven't named a Chris Paul episode?
See, I thought we had 2, but we've been naming it off career playoff games, so he wouldn't have been eligible yet, unless he logged so many that he was on this list earlier and then got a bunch during the season. I would have to go back and look, honestly, and we don't tag him around this. So, but otherwise, it would have been episode 3. I could go back and check if we had done that, but there was a lot of players with number 3, and we typically, at the very beginning of this show, if we were naming episodes by that point, we were typically doing it of retired players that people didn't know.
Okay. Well, how about this? Let's go get this Chris Paul episode started with a little NBA Finals talk, as of course the sweep will not happen in this series. Denver does win Game 3, and they do end up winning it fairly convincingly at the end. Although credit to Miami, they just never go away. Like they made it a little sticky again at the end of that game when it looked like Denver was just sort of coasting and they're ready to get out of those final 6, 7, 8 minutes. They got that thing back down to where Denver got a little nervous the last couple of minutes. And
I think it was within 9.
It was 9 or 10 before when they called the final timeout and said, okay, guys, let's not collapse this one, please. We only got to win 4. This is a chance to be halfway there. Relax, everybody. And Joel, lots of stuff to talk about coming out of that game. Specifically, Nikola Jokic becoming the first player ever to do a trip dubs with a 30-point burger on the front end of that. And then his teammate Jamal Murray becomes the second player to ever do it in NBA Finals history. Oh, what about the span of 4.5 minutes?
And 32 and 21 and 10 for Jokic. 22-17. I'm looking at the wrong one here. No, 34. 10 and 10 for Jamal Murray. 34, 10 and 10.
Yeah, he had a 30, 10 and 10, well, roughly, and then 30, 20, 20 for 30, 20, 10 for Nikola Jokic. Joel, this series has always sort of been interesting because of what Miami can do tenaciously. And a lot of that is what they saw happen in the first half of that game. The rotations sound pretty crisp. They played really, really well that first half. Seemed like Denver wanted to allow Bam Adebayo to sort of go out and beat him. So Bam said, all right, I'm going to start doing my best. And he played really, really well all night, including in that first half.
As he has done this whole series. Bam's been great.
That's true. Everything that could have gone right for the most part, especially in that first half specifically, went right for Miami. And they trailed by 5 at the half. So, that's why I think we sort of both thought that if, Boston or Miami, whoever got it, it was probably going to be a Denver series. They're just loaded is Denver. They just had to get past that. We've never done this kind of thing before. But, Joel, this team literally is just that loaded. Like, they are so good. If you look at the box score from last night, just the box score numbers, you're probably thinking that Miami wins that game, and it's definitely not a double-digit loss. But it was. It was. And, Joel, I want to know what you think is the top-end headline you get from the way that game played out and how, despite looking at all the turnover numbers and the fact that Miami makes 6 more threes than Denver, and Denver had a bunch more turnovers than Miami, this was still Denver kind of going away at the end.
Yeah, and Denver only shot 5 of 18 from downtown, which usually should be a recipe. That should be a recipe for disaster if you're the Nuggets. I think the headline for me, beyond just the triple doubles in the history there, and this was the Murray Jokic game, like they saved everything the whole way, but they did get a lot of help defensively, and I think overall the headline is Denver woke up. Denver got woken up by the Heat in game 2, where the Nuggets showed up and they played good defense. They played good offense for a regular season game. And that was not how Denver had won game 1. In game 1, Denver was flying all over the place. They were playing with a huge intensity to match Miami's. In fact, making Miami play catch up in the intensity game of game 1. A lot of block shots at the rim in the first quarter. Miami, of course, did threaten much more in the second half, and they found something. And so it was curious that Denver in game 2 at home, theoretically knowing what they know, would walk into that game and just play very conventionally. And that's not good enough to beat the zombie Heat. It's not. And, Coach Mike Malone talked about that after game 2. And what you saw in game 3 was a response. Aaron Gordon, 11 and 10. Very active defensively. When he's gotten beat, it's been not a lack of effort, but maybe some bad technique at a couple times, bad closeouts, or guys just making tough shots over him. But Gordon has been very tough inside. He was hitting the glass hard. Michael Porter Jr. has been offensively atrocious in this series so far. He is due for a big game. You hope that he's going to get it. His confidence doesn't look great. But in game 1, for example, it was Porter who had a couple of those early blocks and rotations where it's like, oh, don't forget about this guy. He's tall. He's also patrolling to back up Gordon and Jokic at the rim. We did not see that kind of defensive intensity from Porter in game 2. And it showed. I thought it was one of the reasons why the Nuggets lost. In game 3, Porter had a lot of bad defensive rotations and only played 21 minutes. But when engaged, also had some really good plays, and I did see him active, very active in making an effort on the defensive glass, especially in the first half. You're not going to see all of that with 7 rebounds, for example, because he only got some of them, but it was good box outs that also sometimes are just battling for rebounds that also helped Jokic or Gordon come up with the ball or a tip out. So it was other guys, even when they didn't have a big scoring night, outside of Christian Brown, who was a life saver for Denver in that second half. everybody was stepping up and on the same page defensively, and then they were letting the two big boys on this team, Murray and Jokic, score most of the points. But Christian Brown, and this was Mike Malone coaching here, when Miami came out in the second half and played a zone and a whole bunch of different zones, Mike Malone suddenly trusted a rookie. Why? Well, Christian Brown has shown through these last couple games that he can be trustworthy. He showed in the regular season, but he was really shaky through parts of the playoffs. Why did he get those minutes, and why did he show up? You know why? Because Christian Brown, playing on a championship team in Kansas last year, how much zone do you think those guys saw against them in the NCAA tournament and in the regular season? A ton, right? A ton. And so Christian Brown, better than probably anybody else on the Nuggets roster, is very keyed in to how to beat those types of zones that Spoelstra throws at these NBA players who have not seen them in years, have not practiced against it in years. And here's Christian Brown going, oh yeah, you cut right here, you come baseline, you do this, and Jokic and Murray being smart enough finding him on some of those plays. And then Brown, of course, also making some big defensive stops. I mean, took Jimmy Butler right to the can and scored over him. It was a big moment. Stopped Jimmy Butler a couple of times in the post. You can bet that Brown is going to be, he's going to have a big target on his back for game 4. Jimmy Butler and those guys are going to go straight at the rookie and see what he's made of and try to embarrass him. But in game 3, Brown came ready to play, and he was a lifesaver against those zones. But it was Denver's activity level that was so good. Miami tried to play the "we didn't play hard enough" card at the end of the game, and I don't buy that either.
I don't buy that. Yeah, they got beat. They got beat.
Did.
They got a little bit outcoached in that game. It's not to say Eric Spoelstra is not a good coach. Every time you want to say someone gets outcoached, everyone wants to think that, oh, what do you think, he's just terrible? No, like it's just
Malone had a good counter to what Spoelstra.
He had a good counter punch. He had a good counter punch for what Miami wanted to do, and you got to give it up to Christian Brown for being able to effectively do that too, because it's not just coach recognizing, it's player executing it too.
7 of 8 from the field, and most of that came in that third quarter when they needed that.
Is that good?
Somebody.
Is that good or is that okay?
In 19 minutes, you'll take it. And I know a lot of people, are like, oh, they're giving Christian Brown way too much credit. Yes and no. Yes and no, because how many teams have fallen down before these Miami Heat when they bust out these crazy zones in the second half of games? That's been one of the aces in the hole for Miami. And truth be told, it's a 1 seed versus an 8 seed. And Miami has pulled off one of the greatest accomplishments in NBA history. But in such a wacky year, only 9 games separated the best team in the West and the 8th place team in the Eastern Conference. That's not that much. That sometimes is the separation between a 1 and a 3 matchup, or even a 1 and a 2 matchup in a conference finals type of scenario. So it has felt like Miami is the favorite. They have had such a mystique about them, and because they keep coming back in the fourth quarter, it has felt like they've been the favorite, and everybody else is just trying to figure out how to beat Miami, not the other way around.
When do you say that about an 8 seed ever?
Exactly. That's what makes this so incredible and such a testament to how on a string the Heat players have been together, the Eric Spoelstra coaching dynamic, the Jimmy Butler leadership dynamic, how good Bam Adebayo has been in filling all the gaps, the fact that they've got all these shooters who maybe had down regular seasons and now for a lot of these playoffs have been shooting the lights out. It did not happen in game 3, but you kind of feel like, okay, Strus, Duncan Robinson, and Gabe Vincent, of those 3 guys, at least 2 of them are pretty much guaranteed to have a big game 4, right? If they were all off in game 3, a big game 4 is coming. Kevin Love might get in on the party too.
I think so, but it's hard for me to buy into that right now. I mean, think about Caleb Martin, right? Caleb Martin was just on fire last series against Boston. This series, game 3 was the first time he's made more than 1 bucket in the game, right? He's like 6 or 7 of 20 on the series. And he's, he was the dude that was 1 vote away from being the MVP of this last series. And he's been just
He
gone.
Suddenly looks like a role player again, right? And
He-
not a second banana or third banana like he was.
And you kind of sort of understand that for the most part, right? Like that's sort of what is. Sometimes these role players have a magnificent series, a few games, and Caleb Martin happened to have a really long series against Boston that he did that. He did break my boy John Stark's record for the most amount of points by an undrafted player in the conference finals. Whatever. But I'm not bitter. Okay, I'm not bitter. I just want them to lose the finals because in the finals.
Yeah, just salty, not bitter.
No, not yet. That's right. Not bitter. just very, very salty about that. That record stood since '94, by the way. Not that means a whole heck of a lot anyway, but especially since there's nothing happening here from him in the finals so far. But I will say this. It felt like to me sort of watching the game last night that, what we sort of saw from game 2 was it felt like, okay, you know what we're going to do? We're going to go out here. If we're Miami, we're going to make sure Jamal Murray doesn't have that big game, right? We're going to let the Joker score method work. Like Joker, that team is just not nearly as good when he's scoring 40 and on his own and he's not putting up the 12, 15, 20 assists in a game.
Right. He had something like only 4 or 5 assists in game 2, right? Which is crazy for him. Crazy.
It is. And then you don't see they don't repeat the strategy right in game 3, which
I think they tried. I saw Jamal Murray. Yeah, I honestly do. I think Jamal Murray was so good and so aggressive in this game, and the Nuggets began screening with different angles and different personnel coming in, and they really doubled down on let's not bring Gordon or Porter or even Caldwell-Pope to screen for Murray. These are going to be a steady diet of Jokic Murray stuff, but we're going to flip it back and forth. We're going to get it back to Jokic in a pick and roll, and the idea is to get it back to Murray out of that, which they did, and pick and pops, and Murray just, when he did not have the ball, I thought Murray was a lot more active about cutting to the elbow, cutting off of back screens, not just being active when he had the ball and was in the main action. And he wasn't taking no for an answer to score the basketball. And that's what it's going to take for the Nuggets going forward. I do think the Heat tried to slow him down, and this time they didn't have an answer for him.
I could concede some of that point. To me, it didn't feel like that's what it would happen. And maybe it was because of, as you mentioned, that the other partner in that Jokic Murray duo was so much crisper and better than he was in game 2. As we sort of talked about, it seemed like Mike Malone may have gotten their butts a little bit and said, hey, listen, you're not just going to walk in and out-talent these guys and then win the game. You're going to have to go out there. We're going to have to make some adjustments, and you're going to have to be crisper and better than what you were in game 2.
It's a street fight, right? So you got to be in the street fight, and then your talent will help carry you above it, but not if you're not coming to fight.
Yeah,
I mean, Miami is there to fight.
That's one of the cool things about this series that you don't get in a lot of previous series that in I think in a while, that Miami, sometimes you get sort of an you always have an underdog, but you don't have nearly as usually as severe an underdog, right? In this series for the most part of the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years. But what you got is a team not only that's sort of the underdog, but that punches harder on their counterpunch, and sometimes it hits. Sometimes it hits, and it staggers someone like the 1 seed Nuggets, who had not lost at home this entire postseason, and they beat them in Denver in game 2, and they're like, oh, this is why we kind of like this Miami team. Like, they're not going to back down. They do the same thing over and over and over again. Not strategy-wise, but just what they do is they come after you over and over. They believe in their culture, their system. They believe in the positivity of it. They believe that they're coming after you over and over, and eventually you're going to make those mistakes. And I think to a decent degree, some of those mistakes, especially in the first half, they forced to happen. They had they forced 17 turnovers, something. I don't remember what the number was, but it was double-digit turnovers. Definitely that they. In fact, it was. I thought the number, and I don't have it in front of me, was near double digits. The difference between the turnovers between the two teams.
Denver only got clocked for 13 turnovers in that game, which seems generous. It seems like there was quite a few more in there that maybe didn't get logged as a turnover, but it was because of Miami's activity that a play got broken or whatever. Because I definitely hear you on that. Miami was forcing Denver into some sloppy
13
stuff.
Turnovers to 4. Miami had just 4 turnovers in the game. So, yeah, they're double digits there. But I'll tell you this, Joel. The one number that stands out when you sort of see the difference between these two, do you have the box score in front of you?
Yeah, 58 rebounds for Denver. Is that it?
58 rebounds to 33 for Miami.
Mm-hmm.
Mercy, you just can't win basketball games that way by being minus 25 in the rebound.
41 of those rebounds came between Jokic, Murray, and Aaron Gordon.
Oh, man, that was just for everything that did go super well for Miami in the first half. And again, they were still down 5 after that.
Mm-hmm.
The second half, I don't want to say the wheels sort of came up, but Miami got out adjusted during halftime, and Denver came out swinging in the third quarter, and it looked like they were ready to run Miami out of the building for a little bit until Miami sort of, after they got punched in the mouth again themselves, had to sort of stagger and regain their footing to sort of make it a little bit closer at the end to make Denver a little bit more nervous. But man, like this has been for me for such a difference in styles and sort of talent level purely the talent level. This has been a really fun 3 games.
Miami draws a line in the sand, spits on that line, and then dares you to come cross it, right? Yeah. That's the nature of it. But if you're willing to fight, Miami is an under-talented team. They've been an under-talented team this entire playoffs, especially without Tyler Hero, who may or may not return during this series. So those 41 rebounds between the trio of Nuggets I just mentioned, those don't happen, at least not to that frequency, if all 5 of the guys on the floor were not so dialed into the rebounding game. There was a lot of great boxing out, a lot of great competing, a lot of great tipping the ball where maybe you don't get credit for that rebound, but your teammate does. Michael Porter Jr., like I mentioned at the top, only had 7, but he was involved in quite a few of those first half rebounds by trying to tip it and keep it alive. Jeff Green had 0 rebounds. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope 3. Bruce Brown 2.
But the thing about Jeff Green is he had a dinner before the game in between with the fellas. That's what matters.
Christian Brown 4 rebounds. But every single one of those guys, I can go back to plays picturing them in the scrum affecting it. If they didn't grab it, it got to Jokic because they were there, they were digging down. That's a hallmark of what the Miami Heat do and what they've done. Is this team gang rebounding. They've been doing everything as a group on a string. And it just goes to show kind of what I was speaking about before. If Denver is willing to and able to match the Miami Heat intensity and turn it into that street fight, now you take that away as a variable because both teams are matching each other. And this is where Denver's superior length and superior talent can come out to play, and I think eventually put the Miami Heat away for as good as they've been. But if Denver lets go of the rope at all, if they go back to playing conventional regular season basketball, which sure gets you 53 wins and gets you the number 1 seed, that ain't good enough. And suddenly the talent disparity erodes completely. And then it's Jimmy Butler coming to play, or it's Max Strus or Duncan Robinson knocking out threes, Bam Adebayo really getting what he wants when he gets into that mid post. All of a sudden, those things come to play along with the turnovers that Kyle Lowry and Gabe Vincent force, the charges that Lowry and Kevin Love take. All of those things start to play into the margin, and that's why Miami's been able to beat these teams that did not want to street fight them. They didn't want to do it flat out.
Let me ask you. Well, first of all, I think that's why Denver probably wins this thing 6 max. I think this could be over in 5 because I think Game 2 was sort of that punch in the mouth game. Then I think I've used that like 4 times. That was this sort of, hey, welcome to the series for Denver because Denver started the series with like a 10-point lead at the first quarter, Game 1, right at about nearly 20 at the first half of Game 1. So I think they probably thought, okay, yeah, Miami's a cute story coming out of the East. They're probably banged up. They just played a 7-game series. We're going to be able to just roll them. And to a degree in Game 1, they were able to. But in Game 2, a much different scenario. Miami, like you said, they don't let go of the rope. No matter what the final score is, no matter how many games,
and they're not going to in Game 4. You can bet the intensity level is going to go up even another notch, right?
So I think that's why Mike Malone, especially after Game 2, was so salty about his team and talking about how that he couldn't believe that in Game 2 of the finals we're talking about effort, and in that game, and it makes a whole bunch of sense, right? Because Denver probably thought, what you saw in game 1 was a lot of what you were going to get in game 2. And that was not the case. If that maybe we go to drop one of these in Miami, maybe. Right, but we're gonna win at home because we always win at home. We just crushed them in Uncle. We could have sat everybody down and won the fourth quarter if we won the fourth quarter long enough, or extended it to be able to win. I think they end up only holding on by like 11 or 12 in that game.
Yeah,
but still, that was a huge. I think game 2 was a huge wake up call for Denver, Joel, and I think that bodes well for them the rest of the series. Miami still can win game 4, but like you said, they're going to have to, not rest on what happened in game 3, especially in that third quarter.
Game 3 was a must win for Denver, an absolute must win, because I still believe this. If Miami gets up in this series, Miami's going to win it, because it is like a boa constrictor. They're just going to keep strangling you at that point. But if Denver can keep this tied or keep one game ahead, and obviously statistically, yeah, they're going to win eventually, but I think it does really behoove Denver. You got to make this thing 3-1. Make it 3-1. Yeah, you can put the goal in the back of your mind. We want to win a championship in Denver on our home floor in game 5. Obviously, you can't get that far ahead, but you have to come out recognizing that Miami is for real. They will up this intensity even more. The ball will be hopping. They have too much pride at this point. They have too much pride in what they've done to have gotten to this point in the finals, that, they're getting backed into a corner now. And what happens when you back a fighter into the corner, right? You back a dog into the corner. It's going to get nasty. And Denver needs to be the one that punches first, that sets the tone, that takes those punches that Miami will inevitably throw, but keep coming back, keep attacking, keep going into the paint, keep daring them to try to stop the Murray and Jokic combo. Michael Porter Jr., for the love of all that is good and pure, please start knocking down some shots. The Nuggets need you to have a 28 to 35 point game in here where you are on fire and suddenly it changes the geometry of the entire floor.
I don't understand.
It has to happen soon.
Is 1 of 7 not the kind of game you're looking for from Michael Porter Jr.?
He's so flat.
How about the 2 of 8?
He's so flat. The shots are very mechanical. They feel rushed, and yet also as if he's hesitating at the same time, if that makes sense. And then, yeah, the follow-through looks okay, but the arc of the ball is way off from what you normally see from him. I don't know if it's a matter of trying to get him some easy ones early in a game, but that's also playing with fire, because you got to get Murray and Jokic going. That's where the bread is buttered. And, Aaron Gordon, every time he's got a smaller player, there's a mandate, get Aaron Gordon the ball. That's where he's going to score. That keeps the pressure on Miami inside to not start to hedge off of Gordon, especially when he's hanging out in the corner. It keeps a bigger player on him. So I get all that. Porter is the fourth, maybe fifth option when on the floor, but he's got to get going. And you know what? Kentavious Caldwell-Pope's been kind of despicably cold over the last couple of games too. They're going to need those guys.
Well, I think Porter's due for something soon. He's 3 of 19 from 3 in the series. He's not this good of a player to stay this cold for this long.
This is their third wheel. This isn't a role player.
Right.
This is Denver's third wheel, right?
And the fact that he's been so bad, especially from beyond the arc, the entire series so far, and the fact that Denver's still up 2-1, and in both those games, didn't really need a whole lot from him. Although he did make like 5 threes. He was 5 of. Well, no, look at the math here. Yeah, he's 2 of 11 from 3 in game 1, but 5 of 16 from the field. So he gave up 14 points, but didn't need all of that working for them for Denver to be able to grab that win. Let me ask you about Miami, and then we can move on to some other team news that's out there. What do you make of how Jimmy Butler's series has gone so far? Jimmy Butler was a darling for the first 3 rounds of the playoffs, and in this series, he's been fine, pretty good even for a large chunk of it, but he's not been himmy. He has not been that guy that it's been able to sort of lift his team above everybody. In fact, we saw some of this happen in the Boston series when Boston was starting to nudge their way back into it, that we saw, something that we have seen before in Jimmy Butler's history, that he was so hot, he had to cool at some point. But what do you make of what we've seen so far in this series, and maybe even goes back to the back end of the Boston series?
I see Denver recognizing that Jimmy Butler's claim to fame this playoffs has been running through people. And we talked about that in the Boston series when they finally tightened it up too. Milwaukee was not ready for the physicality that the Heat and Jimmy Butler brought. And even though they had good defenders, and I think this is part of what was damning on Coach Mike Budenholzer, former Coach Budenholzer, is that he didn't adjust, and he didn't get his guys to adjust to defending a guy who was really playing running back for the Miami Heat and just blowing through the holes and daring people to body check him. Yeah. And New York did some of that because New York is a good physical defensive team, but New York also didn't have that stable of multiple defenders capable of doing that. And Jimmy Butler hit some crazy shots. At that point, he was in peak form of just knocking down crazy stuff way outside of the statistical norm for him. Boston got punched in the mouth. And then Boston, when they woke up, it was a little too late. But when they woke up and got 3 games in a row, it was because they have physical defenders, they have bigger wings, and they started to body check and match that physicality, bring multiple defenders, wall him up. Yeah, he's going to hit some crazy turnaround Kobe-esque jumpers. Yeah, he may still hit a couple of head-scratching threes, but his percentages went way down, and he was having to work a lot harder, and you saw the fatigue begin to settle in with Jimmy Butler a little bit. Shots started to go flat, makeable shots, maybe even the crazy ones from before were not all going down. And Denver, I think, has taken a play out of that. This, again, goes back to Aaron Gordon, who's got quite a few inches on Jimmy Butler height-wise, is definitely as bulky and strong as Butler, and has just bodied him up and said, if you're going to force the refs to swallow their whistle, 2 can play at that game. There is a lot of fouling going on offensively. I mean, Jimmy Butler's committing offensive fouls left and right. He's not getting called for them. But the defenders now are not getting called for fouls on Jimmy Butler anywhere, close to what you normally would see in a regular season either. And that's Aaron Gordon. You've seen Bruce Brown do it. I do not understand, unless there's a statistical anomaly or nugget, pun intended, for why that's something that Denver's seeing, that they continue to be fine with putting Jamal Murray on Jimmy Butler for so many possessions. I don't get that. I think that's playing with fire, but it's worked okay. Contavious Caldwell-Pope, probably a little too rail thin to be checking Jimmy Butler more than a few plays, but he's been good as a help defender. And Bruce Brown, again, another beefy guy like Josh Hart was supposed to have been for the New York Knicks, for example. There are body types that can slow Butler down, but you got to match that physicality. So I think that's where Denver has made that adjustment. That's where Jimmy is slowing a little bit, but it really doesn't help when, Max Strus 0 of 10 in game 1, then has a great game 2 through the first half. He was 1 of 4 from downtown, 1 of 7 in game 3. Duncan Robinson was the savior for the Miami Heat in game 2. They don't win that game without Robinson getting flamingly hot in the second half, but he was quiet. 14 minutes, 3 of 6 from downtown seems okay, but it's got to be better. Like, they need more from some of those guys. And like you said, Caleb Martin's been quiet too. So Denver, in slowing Jimmy Butler down, is also playing good enough physical defense. And the Miami Heat, I think, are beginning to regress towards the mean just a little bit. They were not a team capable of shooting 50% plus from downtown during the regular season. And I think some of that's coming back down to earth just a little bit here.
I think so. I think what you said there at the beginning was such a great point, is that Miami, especially if we go back to the beginning of the Boston series, the first 3 games, Miami was just so much more willing to attack and be physical. And
Bam was doing it too. Caleb Martin was doing it too, right? Kyle Lowry was doing it. They were all just running through people.
And Boston needed a few games, I guess, to adjust to that, because they didn't start until, I guess, they had to have it in game 4 to start saying, listen, all right, we're going to start heading to the basket. We're going to start just body on body. Like if these refs will swallow their whistle, we'll get more physical with them. And that's not something Boston has done a ton this season. So maybe sort of two teams that Boston struggled with this regular season, New York and Miami, two super physical teams.
Yeah.
And they especially weren't expecting all that physicality in the regular season. That's just how these two teams play for the most part. So Jimmy Butler had to, in the back end of that Boston series, fight harder and fight through a lot more than what he did the first half of the Boston series.
There was resistance now.
A lot more resistance. In this series against Denver, since game one, Denver is a better defensive team than Boston. Like, they're just more physical. They have more guys, as you sort of talked about the body type. I think that's completely right. They have more guys that can match up physically for a handful of plays here, a handful of plays there. They can come be help defenders on Jimmy Butler that make everything harder for Jimmy Butler.
Even Jeff Green and Christian Brown have made Butler work because they keep cycling between like 6 different defenders, and there's going to be help. They're able to bring fresh bodies against Butler, and those guys, by and large, even if they get beat here and there, they're making him work. He's not getting easy. I mean, nothing was easy for Jimmy Butler, even in those first rounds where he was running through people. But comparatively speaking, there's no more free lunch for Jimmy Butler. Like, there just hasn't been.
And these refs are swallowing their whistles more, as sort of tends to be the case once you get deep into the playoffs when more eyeballs are on. People don't want to see a ref whistle fest. So for the most part, they sort of let the guys play a lot more than what you see in the regular season and a lot more than what you see in the first round or two of the playoffs. So it's been harder for Jimmy to be able to get those kind of numbers off. He's been fine. He's been good. He's been pretty good in stretch. Even game 3, he was pretty good. But, like, he hasn't been the guy that elevated the team and been able to, despite the fact that a Bam Adebayo helped as much as he can. I think only 2 of the guys, was it 2 or 3 of the Heat players that got into double digits? Caleb Martin got 10. So they got into double digits. You weren't seeing a bunch of help, even though you were seeing, a ton of dudes come off the bench to try to do sort of a little bit of anything at that point. They weren't getting as much help as they sort of needed in that game. And Jimmy Butler, I think once you can key on a Jimmy Butler, a Bam Adebayo is not going to kill you, no matter what kind of, what he ended up doing. He ended up
22 and 17, but he was 7 of 21 from the floor.
22 and 17 is a great stat line for Bam Adebayo.
Yet he was minus 20 on the floor. How about that?
Exactly. He's minus 20 on the floor. You lost by 15. Denver will take that 1,000 times out of 1,000. If Jimmy Butler, instead of 28, Jimmy Butler's going to have to throw like a 45-point game out here soon. Like, if they're going to be able to win this series. They can do it. They can compete in this series without it. But if they want to be able to win it, they're going to have to find a way to get Jimmy Butler. And I don't know if it's a Tyler Hero being able to come back later in the series, even if he can. I'd read or heard something a week and a half ago or so that he was still struggling to get, like, just basic ball handling out of that hand.
I think it's going to be rust.
Yeah, like, if Denver the team, you want to be able to just throw that guy out there and say, all right, we just need somebody who can throw up the threes, even though you haven't played for 6 weeks. I don't know, man. I don't know. I think Jimmy Butler has had a phenomenal playoff run. It should be noted in the history books as one of the great runs for taking this 8 seed. I just think that everything is sort of matched up now against them, including, as you said, this regressing back to what this team statistically has been for the majority of the season.
And one last thing for me before we move on to other teams quick. That physicality is not just on the defensive end where you're going to make Butler and Bam and all those guys really work a lot harder to get their own. That physicality you also then have to bring against them on the other end of the floor, which is something that Boston did figure out in their 3 wins of the previous series. We saw guys like Marcus Smart and Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown putting their head down and also running through Heat defenders and daring fouls to be called. And you've seen that with Aaron Gordon. Like, how many times is he, especially in game 1, but they've been very clearly trying to get him to play bully ball as much as possible anytime there's that mismatch.
Jokic is taking Cody Zeller from beyond the arc and then shoving him on the floor and getting no calls. And like,
Jokic, I was, and I was just about to say, Jokic is road gradering people down into the paint, like just taking him down there and then getting into his hook shot. But you also see Bruce Brown lowering his shoulder to get stuff. You've seen Christian Brown be very physical for a rookie. The guy who's really standing out to me in the physicality department is Jamal Murray. Jamal Murray is not really known as like a physical guy. I think he's got more of like a finesse scorer, shooter type of label. But Jamal Murray has really been sticking his nose in there defensively to get some pokeaways. He's been really helping on the team rebounding front. But even to get his shots, he is taking contact, a lot of contact, but still trying to get to his spots into the mid-range and getting looks that are very tough to make, but very makeable for Jamal Murray. And it's a testament to, again, that physicality, that street fight mentality. It is not just down on the defensive end. It's got to be the whole game, both ends. That's how Miami forces you to play. But if you match that, as we've said, then some good things can start to happen, and that's what's going on for the Nuggets.
We've seen Denver grind like this before, especially in the postseason when they could have easily dropped one or maybe even two in Los Angeles and made that a longer series.
That's true.
Or the Phoenix series, they could have easily.
Yeah, LA was real physical too. That's a great point.
Yeah, so and they just maybe we don't think Jamal Murray like that, but maybe Jamal Murray sort of has the great coaching now with Mike Malone, plus the fact that they're this close to getting that world championship for him, that maybe that sort of changes how, he's more of a, I'll do anything you ask. Like, are we attacking? Are we going, nose to the grindstone kind of? Okay, whatever we got to do. We're 2 games now away from being able to hoist that Larry O'Brien. Let's do it, man. So, all right, let's talk about some sort of, I guess it's on the court, off the court issue. Joel, I don't know if you saw this. Chris Paul looks like he is going to be waived by the Phoenix Suns. I thought he already was, by the fact that he couldn't play anymore physically. He's been oft injured, and it looks like he's going to have his opportunity to go make a bunch of money somewhere else. Phoenix is just going to make that choice to move on, and it's hard to blame that franchise for wanting to move on at this point. Chris Paul got them to a place they've sort of not been to in a long, long time, or ever for the final. Wouldn't have been to the finals, but not to since this. I don't know, 20 years, 20 plus years.
Where Barkley, Steve Nash never got him there.
Yeah, you're right. They're Steve Nash. So 20 plus years where they sort of middled at best, been pretty bad for long times. Now they're sort of ready to make that next step. You got the Kevin Durant, you got the Devin Bookers, you got the, for better or worse, DeAndre Ayton for as long as you want. Chris Paul's not going to be a part of that, and it's hard to say that you don't see that with a new ownership, a new coach, and the fact that they're close. They seem to be physically, bodies-wise, close. So the end of Chris Paul in Phoenix is near. Does David Stern come up from the grave to block a Los Angeles Lakers reunion with Chris Paul?
No, you can guarantee that's where Paul's going to wind up if he gets waived. You can guarantee it.
Do you think – okay, so I've heard some speculation that, LeBron is interested because he's free agent, sort of do – well, actually, he's got a player option, right? So he could exercise that player option. So he can sort of – he's had eyes for other places. He's been interested. Potentially, you think he'll be on that list. Cleveland might be on that list again. Dallas got kind of rumored that Kyrie was sort of trying to touch base with LeBron to convince him to come to Dallas. Los Angeles obviously plays a place for LeBron. But I've heard that, Chris Paul may be just sort of riding this banana boat to wherever, LeBron James goes. Do you think he just sort of follows LeBron, or do you think it's LA or bust at this point?
If LeBron goes, I think Paul could chase those coattails. I don't see LeBron leaving LA. I don't. I think there's going to be some rumors. There may be
people bring up the Dallas thing, but I don't think LeBron at this point. I don't think, especially with his son going to USC starting up this next semester,
right.
Him being LA. Leaving. This is basically like his legacy tour, part of the tour, right? This is the. I can't see going from LA to, no offense to Mark Cuban, but Dallas, right? Like, here's what makes sense. Cleveland drafted him. That makes sense, of course, to be a Cleveland start. Miami made sense. The super team were coming, and you had Dwayne Wade, and Chris Bosh was going to come in too. That made some sense. Going back home, great story. Awesome story. Made sense to come back to Los Angeles, business career, rejuvenate the Lakers franchise, win a title there. That makes sense. Then now, with this close to the end of his career, to go to Dallas that doesn't make sense. And I can't see going
to
another.
It's wishful thinking.
I can't see going to doing another tour in Cleveland, to be honest with you, no matter how good Cleveland is. So I'm with you. I think either he quote unquote retires or retires for a year and then plays still in LA. But I think it's LA or nothing for LeBron. I'm with you.
So imagine
LeBron James in Dallas like that.
It's not happening.
Makes no sense.
That is sports writers trying to get clicks. That's originating within a Dallas camp of somebody who needs to hit their quota of reads, and so you write a speculative piece about how he could go there.
Made a phone call. That's all it takes, right? They love each other.
Sure. Because Kyrie's been such a winning player that you would want to hitch your wagon to if you're trying to get that final championship. Sorry. Yes, the only ace in the hole there is LeBron loves Luka. Absolutely loves Luka as a player. And if LeBron is like, hey, I want to play with this kid, at least once before my time is up, I don't really care if we get a ring. I've gotten my rings, my legacy's set. It'd be cool to play with this guy. He's kind of the heir apparent to me in a lot of ways, as far as being like this point forward type of player. So that would be the ace in the hole. It had nothing to do with Kyrie, but
I don't. The rest of the cards are twos.
I don't love this for Phoenix, and I'm going to roll this into the Frank Vogel discussion. I don't like any of the things that are happening with the Phoenix Suns right now. And to me, it's a testament to they had really crappy ownership before this. New ownership comes in. It's been a dysfunctional franchise for a long time that somehow has managed to win a lot of games despite being so dysfunctional, even back to the Steve Nash era. And now again under Devin Booker. They've had talented teams that have won in spite of the fact it's been kind of a dumpster fire behind the scenes. Frank Vogel, for example, I don't get. I think people are giving him way too much credit that he won a championship with LeBron and Anthony Davis. Big deal. You had LeBron and Anthony Davis. Yeah, you had some good Indiana teams, and I think he was well suited there. But I think more of the real Frank Vogel ability or lack thereof was seen in Orlando, for example, or when things were not going all that well in LA. I don't think he's a game-changing coach by any means. I don't think he carries the respect and clout that a former player does within the, among other NBA players. He doesn't have that. He also was not a college player really of any kind. So it's a tough sell for guys like that, coaches like that, to get respect, especially in a big market with a title hunting team and established veterans. And Phoenix is all of those things. Is that part of the reason why Chris Paul's willing to walk? I don't know, but to me, you're better off. I know Chris Paul has flamed out and left them high and dry in the playoffs basically every year. And it's been the MO of his career that once he gets to the semifinals, or if he makes it to the conference finals, he gets 2 games in and then is hurt and it's done. And his team is hamstrung because they're so reliant on him. But at the same time, if you are able to keep him healthy, you are a way better team with him. And Phoenix is not going to be able to replace what Paul brings internally or externally. The only thing that I see about this is maybe it's a financial decision. His contract for next year is $30 million, $30.8 million.
Why is that so cheap right now compared to what James Harden's asking for, what Jaylen Brown's about to get? It does feel kind of.
But here's the thing: it's only partially guaranteed. Only half of that is guaranteed. So if he gets picked up on waivers, some other team will sign him to a requisite contract. It's not going to be worth $15 million, but it'll be a few million. So that amount that the Suns owe Chris Paul to not play for them is probably going to be in about the $10 million range next year. Okay, if you're really that concerned about the luxury tax, but you brought in Kevin Durant, what are you doing? This is an all-in type of moment where you have Durant. Pay the tax, keep your talent. You cannot replace the $10 million that you're going to pay to Chris Paul to go away, and you're not going to have enough left over to replace what he's bringing to the table. This feels like the classic type of Suns penny-pinching move when Robert Sarver was owner. Okay. When they were giving up on draft picks that could have turned into Rajon Rondo and Luol Deng and so many of these guys that they never drafted but would have had there that they gave up on to save some money, this is not a good sign. And Frank Vogel is about as uninspired a pick as you can make if you're the Phoenix Suns. If I was somebody like Devin Booker, I'd be pissed. And if I was somebody like Kevin Durant, I'm going, geez, am I going to have to switch teams again?
So it's an interesting sort of thought process there you got there for the Suns, because this is the franchise that, even though technically it was not given under the new owner, he has to inherit the contract of a pretty expensive one in DeAndre Ayton, who's going to be making over $35 million a year for the next, I guess it's 3 more years after this one now, since this one's up. Yep. This can't be just I shouldn't say can't. I don't think this is a financial move. I think this literally is just this body. We've given this guy a shot for several years. He's been great for us when he's been on the court, but he's missed so many games, so many important games that we need somebody that's going to be, if we're going to be paying for that contract, we need somebody that we can at least have available on the court. So if it is a penny pinching move, it is a really bad one. I agree with you that just, it doesn't make sense to do this to Chris Paul if it's purely financial. That's why I think, even though I thought a lot of the Robert Sarver stuff was dumb too with the penny pinching part, it has to be just a physically being able on the court play, because the money he's going to make, Chris Paul, that is, next year, if it goes to, let's say, the Los Angeles Lakers, it's going to be nowhere near the $30 million that sort of he got here. I don't know where it's going to end up being, but the Lakers can make a contract that'll sort of work for him and for the league luxury tax there, so they don't get crazy hit on.
Well, what'll happen is they'll let D'Angelo Russell walk. The Lakers will, rather than re-upping his contract, and they'll sign Chris Paul for a fraction of what they would have had to pay D'Lo to keep him, and they'll trot out Dennis Schroeder, who is a player that's available quite often in a timeshare with Chris Paul, and they'll hedge their bets that they'll do their best to keep Chris Paul healthy by the playoffs, and if not, they'll ride with Dennis Schroeder, which hasn't been the worst thing in the world for them, over the last season and a half that he's been very effective for the Lakers.
D'Angelo Russell this next year is let's see, 2022, 20. Oh, so he's a UFA that's coming up.
Yeah, and he's thinking that he deserves max money, which ain't going to happen, but it's still going to be a hefty contract. It may be up, maybe not to 30 million, but it's going to be close.
Well, 30 is what he was just making. It's like so he was just this last year was $31.5 million.
I think he'll probably be in the 27 to 28 range is what the market will bear out for D'Lo.
Poor guy. Poor guy, but I feel for him. Your Frank Vogel comment though is spot on. When I saw that was the hire, I was completely uninspired. I was convinced that Frank Vogel didn't even exist for the NBA to think about right now. Right? It might be an assistant be able to be there, but not the head coach. I worry that we're going to see a Doc Rivers type situation where you got the one ring, and that buys you a lot more time than it should. And now I think Doc Rivers is a better coach, much better coach.
I agree.
Vogel. Yeah. But I do think that Frank Vogel is going to get a lot of benefit of this doubt, because he can be like, "Did you see this ring? I mean, it's a bubble ring. It counts. It's a ring. It's a complete ring. It is a total ring. You know what? I want it in the number 2 market in all of America. So I want it with LeBron James, the guy who hates all his coaches, right? I won the championship with that guy. And Anthony Davis, I got them to play for me.
And got fired shortly thereafter. Like, in the grand scheme of things, so shortly thereafter for a guy who had just won a title. I mean, it's almost Mike Budenholzer gave him a run for his money, but it's not often that you have a guy who wins a championship and it's less, basically 2 years later that he's getting canned.
Yeah.
That happened to Vogel.
That, to me, that does not scream fresh energy, fresh ownership, fresh franchise, especially if you're making this move also to sort of find yourself a new point guard that you like, or at least sort of bring somebody else into the fold if you want to have, Durant bring the ball up more. I don't know what you want to do.
It'll be interesting if, as this goes on, and especially if Paul is waived and when he moves on, if anybody airs their dirty laundry. Because I'm curious, did Chris Paul not want to play for Frank Vogel? Did Chris Paul really go, hey, I'd rather just go play with LeBron. It's my last couple of years. Like, was this coming more from the Chris Paul camp where the Suns are like, oh, all right, he's not really invested. We'll do him a solid. We'll waive him. We'll try to get him set up for the destination that he wants. Or just screw you, get out of here if you're not part of this. Or is it the Suns going, you really, as you very well put, like, you just haven't been what we've needed when we've needed it. And we are hunting a championship, and we're going to be better off without you and even a replacement level guy that is there every night,
I realize that he has made enough money to be able to go multi-generations and help that family out.
Mm-hmm.
But the only thing that people with money like is more money.
Typically,
it's either money or more power.
Mm-hmm.
So to just openly give that up, to go for a significantly lower amount to just chase a ring, maybe with LeBron, I would be surprised. But because I just think dudes at that point, well, I don't know, maybe Chris Paul's a different guy. I don't know. Chris Paul's
and a ring is the only thing that eludes him. I mean, at the top of the show, I read off his career accolades. Yeah. A ring is the only thing that eludes him. So maybe it is ring chasing time to get one and have that on his resume.
It would be interesting. I mean, he's already got that Hall of Fame career. He's well regarded for a lot of his skills, and there's not many that's better than him when he's healthy at that spot doing what he does.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know, man.
I have heard him called the best pure point guard ever, and people have said that knowing what Magic Johnson was, and there's a little bit of the asterisks there because of the height and the, and played a different position, all that sort of thing. But I mean, you can make the case that Chris Paul, as good or better than John Stockton, as good or better than Isaiah Thomas and some of the other luminaries who played the position,
I've heard him called the best pure point guard since John Starks. So I've heard that.
Who wasn't even a point guard.
I know. But I just, because they're both little, I like to put they're both tiny people. Man, I like to put John Starks in my pocket right here and just take him around. Be like, what's up, buddy? Let's go make it 3. Let's go do it. Let's go get in the corner. All right, that's going to do it for us on this here Game 3 edition, also known as the, oddly, we have not named it after him, Chris Paul edition.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, Chris Paul almost got the last word in on this, Joel C. Cortez. Let's say goodbye to the good people.
If you want the video version, find us on YouTube, where you should like, share, subscribe, and do all those things. If you want the audio-only version, Spreaker, Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your podcasts. And guess what, Arky, Shea, next week, we may have an NBA champion. We may not. I don't think we will. I think we're going 6 games. But that'll be episode 150, so kudos to us.
Wow, 150 episodes. What if we just didn't do it? We just stopped at 149. We just did not did a 150. We did not wrap up the season if we had a champion. We're just like, you know what? Game 3 of the NBA Finals. That's just how it felt. That's just how it landed. 149. That's good for us.
It would still be a better finale than Lost. So,
okay, we'll have this private discussion. We'll have this one.